I don't know if I've ever held a stock down basically 90% or whatever it went down. I know I've done 70, but that's impressive on your. It's either impressive or stupid. I'm not sure which one.
Maybe impressively stupid.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
Doogles, is this the part of the show where we say hi to each other and everyone is just riveted with the intrigue?
You used to be so good at just like being a friend.
Yeah.
Like I felt like I'd come on and this started with the theme song from the Golden Girls. Like that's what I hear. But now you don't even know, you don't understand a salutation. I don't know what happened to you.
That really means a lot to me. Now that I can hear
What
the Golden
means a lot
Girls
to you?
thing, that I used to be good at this, and so I have a desire to be better.
Okay,
this
that's
is really good. Doogles, how was your week?
Step number one is admitting you have a problem. So that's
and
that's
I didn't realize it until Golden Girls was mentioned.
Yeah.
That's really what you do for me.
Love it. It was a good week. I'm feeling solid. I'm feeling on solid ground. And honestly, I would say, and maybe this is just a story I'm telling myself, but I will say the fact that like Tall has effectively been obliterated and has nothing but upside has given me some good mental space. Because I'm not watching this like asteroid heading toward my portfolio Earth anymore. It's just it skimmed the side, and I'm good.
Let's reset on that. I do want to make sure we say our pleasantries to each other, but Tall Education Group, if you've missed the show recently, it was one of Doogles' favorite stocks for a long time. I mean, years, right, Doogles? And it's a education for-profit out of China and was doing crazy business, had grown from, 10, 20 to 90 in the past 2 years or something like that. Check me on these numbers.
Yeah, past few years, but yeah.
It peaked at $90 a share and then just got destroyed by Chinese government threat of regulation turning after-school education into nonprofits, right? Went all the way down to like $4 a share. So that's a little background. The crazy thing, and I don't know if we'll do this today, Doogles, or down the road, but this is the first stock in the last 5 years that we both hold at the same time. Because Doogles is a momentum style investor, long trend, not your average momentum investor, solid fundamentals. As me as a deep value investor, typically those don't cross paths well, and in this case it did. So I just, one, thank you for the recommendation because I think I'm going to make money on it, and two, sorry that it went from 90 to 4 because that wasn't your fault, but three,
No, it wasn't.
It's fun to be like equity brothers with you. I really feel akin.
Let's revel in this time, because I think there have been some threats before. Like even when we were talking about Dollar General, like that could have been one at some point. Although I hold that in the non-momentum portfolio, but still, it's good. And it's just interesting psychology, I think, with this here, because from earlier in the year, China has been saying something's coming this year, and it was hitting the stock. And then the fact that it finally just came, it didn't feel good in the moment, but like now it's just done. I feel better.
Yeah. Psychologically, like I think this is important learning, and I'm so impressed. I don't know if I've ever held a stock down basically 90% or whatever it went down. I know I've done 70, but that's impressive on your. It's either impressive or stupid. I'm not sure which one.
Maybe impressively stupid.
This is where the show needs to be on YouTube, because your facial expressions right now are telling a whole story. I really didn't mean to start the show with this.
Well, how about then we start with this? I'm gonna drop it in the fishbowl for a quick hit. Speaking of watching things go down, there's an ETF that's coming out soon. Not out yet, but filed, and it's SARK is going to be the ticker. And if you look in that SARK, and those last 3 letters is ARK, this is an inverse ETF. An inverse ETF that is targeting a specific individual's portfolio, which I have not seen before. Specifically, it's looking at ARK, which Kathy Wood runs, which has been really hot last year. I think it was like 149%, one of the best performing ETFs last year. Cathie Wood, I'll say deservedly, given its great performance, has like gotten a lot of praise and a lot of following and all that. And I think that her portfolio is yellow trip to nonsense. And so it's fascinating to me that someone is coming out with an anti-ARK ETF. This is what the manager said. So Matt Tuttle is the CEO of Tuttle Capital Management, who's going to manage SARK. And he said the creation of the fund is about providing a tool investors want, and that he's actually an admirer of ARK and of Wood.
Wait. Like an admirer of her social media strategy or something? Because he's clearly trying to bet against all of her stock picks,
but hedging very poorly socially and saying like this is not about you. This is not about you. Of course it's about you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's definitely about her. Doogles, I think shorting stocks is stupid. I don't think people should do it. That's too broad of a statement for the large majority of people. But I'm gonna buy this. I shouldn't buy this. I'm gonna buy. It might be like $3 worth, or it might be like $100 worth, or it might be like $1,000 worth. But I'm gonna buy this because I love the idea. It's hilarious. This is so hilarious. I love the ticker. That's SARK. Like SARK is just a great ticker, and I love that it's a bunch of high flying stocks with what I think are too optimistic bets for their future growth, and then someone's gonna bet against it. Like I just think this is awesome.
We'll see how long this thing lasts, but agreed. This is fascinating. All right, what's next?
A quiz for you. I saw this come across the Twitter, and I just got so excited. I love sports, and I love business. What's better than trying those two together? Forbes came out with their most valuable NFL teams.
Ooh.
I want you to guess at the most valuable team in terms of value. Got any ideas?
It's been so long since I looked at this stuff, like probably 15 years since I looked at this stuff. But I remember back in the day, it was surprising to me because the Redskins, formerly known as the Redskins, now the Washington football team.
Come on.
That was number one back then. Is that still number one?
No, but hey, don't even worry about team order. Just worry about total value at this point.
Oh, okay. All right. So total value of all the teams?
No, of the most valuable team.
Okay. I would go 2.7 billion.
Man, so that's a good guess. That's what it used to be. They're saying the Dallas Cowboys are worth $6.5 billion right now.
Whoa.
And this has changed crazy in the last. So when Steve Ballmer bought the Los Angeles Clippers in the NBA, everyone thought like maybe the New York Knicks were worth $1 billion, $1.5 billion. He paid $2 billion effectively because he had all this Microsoft money, and he was like, I want a team, and there's only 30 teams to buy. So they had this like closed bidding war, and he paid at least double what their true value was because it didn't really matter to him. And he got effectively he got some tax write-offs and stuff. So I feel like that started this craziness in terms of the values jumping exponentially. And then did I tell you which team is number one? Sometimes called America's
Dallas
team?
Cowboys.
Yeah. Any guesses on like top 5, top 10? The Washington football team is currently ranked number 5 at 4.2 billion.
I would then go Packers would be up there. The Patriots would be up there.
Patriots are number 2. Surprisingly, somewhat surprisingly, Packers didn't make this list. It's just because they're small market, man. Even though they have like a national brand, they're not based in New York City or anything. The Jets and Giants, the New York teams both make this list. The Giants are 3 and the Jets are 8. Any other guesses? It's basically big metros.
So number 4 is number 4 what I'm going after? Bears?
Yeah. Bears are 7. 4 is the second largest city in America.
The Rams?
The Rams. Got it. And hey, the Denver Broncos made number 10 on this list. Woo! They're overachieving for market size.
We just need a quarterback for forever.
Yeah, imagine if they had a quarterback. So my 8-year-old, he in his lifetime the Broncos haven't been very good. So he's always like, whenever he has a story about like someone being horrible at athletic performance, it's always like, yeah, they're like the Broncos, man.
Oh man, you got to turn that narrative around.
I love it. I just think it's hilarious.
Okay, I'm gonna I have two fish bowls. Right? I've got the fish bowl that's like nice and light content and witty, and then I have the recommendations that are not recommendations, reading recommendations. This one falls into that. The Nerd Alert fish bowl. There's a paper that came out in July, and what it talks about is how investors are not good at selling, though they are good at buying. So I want to walk through some of the hits from this, and then we can chitter chatter about it.
Now, is this retail investors or professional investors?
No, that's one thing that's different here. There have been studies that have come out that have looked at retail investor trades because the information is more prevalent. So they looked at retail, but this is not retail. What they looked at was the daily holdings of 783 different portfolios that are institutional investors. So the average value of the portfolio was a little under 600 million. 573 million was the average value. So it's different. The average portfolio of what they looked at had about 5 years of return data that they looked at, and again, it's daily holdings, 2.4 million buy trades, 2 million sell trades, and then they converted all market values to US dollars at the end of every day. So that's like some of the methodology.
Gotcha.
Okay. So now let's get to the interesting stuff. So basically, what one of their big takeaways was there's clear evidence that there's skill when it comes to buying, but selling decisions underperform substantially. So when they looked at the methodology they used to compare was they said, if you chose to sell this stock, whatever that stock is from your portfolio, and they would say, if we at random selected a different stock in your portfolio to sell instead, like a random stock, then how do those two compare? What they found was on average, it was 0.8% per year underperformance for the stock they chose to sell. So I'll pause there, and then because you're getting your skeptical, Skippy the skeptic.
I mean, I wanna hear and learn, but I'm not sure that I like that methodology for judging if a sale is good or not. Now, I understand that it's very difficult to judge if a sale is good, but I guess the initial thoughts is I don't necessarily care how it performed against a random stock. I care how that stock performed. Like if that stock went down, then the selling decision you could argue was correct.
I'll have to go back and look to see if they took a look at that, because that would make sense for them to take a look at. But that didn't seem to be the way that they tore it down here. But what as they were kind of trying to see like what's the why behind this, one of the things they said was the case was that when people were looking at buying decisions, they spent a lot of time on it, right? So the way they framed it was that their evidence suggests that an asymmetric allocation of cognitive resources. I don't know why people are so fancy when they write, but an asymmetric allocation of cognitive resources, such as attention, can explain the discrepancy. And one thing I think this is interesting, but you can be Skippy the skeptic if you want. They said that when they looked at cells that came on earnings announcement days, that the underperformance just went away. And going based off their hypothesis that they stated, right? They think that's because from the conversations they were having with people on earnings days, the investors would actually look at data again. Like that, they would go back and look at the fundamentals. They look at all that. When it wasn't earnings days, they didn't spend all that amount of time. They basically mostly sold the stocks that like didn't matter to them as much. And so there was more like fundamental attention. The other thing that this points out is, and I think this is the last data point I'll give, and then I'll pause. The other thing they pointed out was that the underperformance in selling appears most prominently in the fundamentals oriented managers and less so in the momentum strategies. And I think when they zoomed out a bit, they said quantitative strategies, even more so than momentum, like systematic quantitative strategies underperformed less than the people that were active. Oh, there you go. Look at the hand raise. Oh, hallelujah. Huzzah. Yeah, underperformed less than those that were people that were fundamentals oriented and just picking based off their humanity.
I mean, of course, right? Well, so I'm a quantitative value investor. That is one of the reasons I'm a quantitative investor, because human judgment is flawed and emotional. And so if you can have a quantitative strategy that effectively takes that out of the game, I love that because it matches the hypothesis that is ideal for me, Doogles.
I love that because oh man, your nickname should just be confirmation bias.
Yeah, it should be. And like, would you just call me Skippy the Skeptic? I like that one too. Skippy confirmation bias. Like, this is good. Yeah, this is perfect. I typed in Google what I wanted to hear, and it returned the results that I liked. And now I'm going to tell all my friends that I'm the world's best investor. My strategy is perfect.
Yeah, your takeaways from this might have been a little.
Yeah, I hated the
little
methodology when I wasn't sure about it, and then when it confirmed my beliefs, I love this paper. It's the greatest thing ever.
And I should, I didn't mention the name of the paper just to give credit where credit was due. It's Selling Fast and Buying Slow: Heuristics and Trading Performance of Institutional Investors. National Bureau of Economic Research is where this came through, and came out last month in July. Check it out if you want to check it out. 55 pages of pure nerd.
I love it. I mean, so I guess I'll go on my slight tangent. I think that's incredibly important. And if you're investing in individual stocks, especially if you're using a non-quantitative strategy, I just say that the right approach, it's hard to do, but the right approach is to determine fair value of the stock before you purchase it. That's where most people spend their attention, and it looks like the professionals do too. But then you should revise that fair value at a time frame that you determine. Maybe that's yearly, maybe that's more frequently. And at least the value methodology would be when the stock gets to fair value, you should probably sell it. So if you want to do things by the book, there's a way to do it, and a way to have more attention on the selling process, and hopefully not make the errors that are so common.
Going back to your point that you raised earlier around the methodology they use to look at selling underperformance, when I started reading the paper, in the like executive summary, it mentioned that point around fundamentals based managers like underperforming, like they mentioned at the beginning. So when I got into the paper, what I assumed was going to happen was I assumed that they were going to say that the fundamentals based managers sold when it got to fair value, and then the stocks kind of continued to rise, and that was that was what happened. But yeah, that's it's not so much what pointed out. But yeah, I agree. I think so every let me just check myself here. I'm pretty sure this is true. Every stock that I own, whether in my model portfolio or otherwise, I know either when, based on time frame, or under what conditions it will be sold.
See, that makes you in the top 1% of investors in terms of methodology. I mean, in my opinion, so few people do that. And I would say that that's true for the large majority of my stuff, but I do have an occasional flyer on Tall Education Group went to $4 and I didn't do deep value. Like, I didn't do a deep analysis. I said, this is super cheap and I'm going to ride with it. That's a small piece of my portfolio, but yeah, I like that.
I'm glad you like it.
You're saucy today. So I know this is a podcast, and I know that because it's a podcast, people might be interested in podcast listener demographics. I certainly am. Not because I have a podcast, because I find this stuff fascinating. So an article came out in Riverside FM, and you mentioned this last week, Doogles. It's like, and you should probably question some of the stats in this article because the people are trying to sell stuff. So this is like some sort of add-on to some sort of audio thing, and they're trying to sell stuff. But
okay,
that being said, the facts are somewhat fascinating to me. So they estimate that 104 million Americans over the age of 12 listen to a podcast on a monthly basis. I'm not sure if I thought that would be a higher number or a lower number, but let's call it a third of the U.S. population. That's on a monthly basis. They're saying roughly a third of the population listens to a podcast. They say or estimate that 55% of the U.S. population has listened to a podcast ever.
Wow.
So, like, some people have probably listened to one podcast and they're never coming back. But almost half the population might not even know that a podcast app exists or how to download anything. Yeah. It's not as mature of a market as I thought it might be.
Some of these kinds of things do surprise me, right? Because there's stuff that we take for granted because of how often we do it. But I remember when I read Brad Stone's book about Amazon. I can't remember what it was called. But anyway, he wrote a book about Amazon like a decade ago. And in it, he was talking about how Bezos, when he went and like first met his father, this is after he's like Amazon's like a big thing. Like his dad had never heard of him never heard of Amazon. Right. So and like, how can you imagine someone that does, but they're right. It's a thing, right? People live different lives and they like all this internet stuff isn't important to them. Anyway, it's crazy for me to think about given how much I consume, but.
So, do you think your average monthly podcaster has a full-time job or not?
Yes.
It's closer than I thought. They say 51% has a full-time job. So I guess that maybe that crowd less than 18 makes up a lot of the listening body.
That's interesting.
It's certainly a younger crowd. So they say 49% of monthly podcast listeners are between 12 and 34. And then 40% are between 35 and 54. So it skews younger.
Okay.
But 17% have a household income between 100K and 150K. Seems reasonable. And almost 30% have a university degree. But I think am I remembering that right? Doesn't about 30% of the U.S. population have a college degree?
It's something like that.
So maybe that doesn't really tell you anything about podcast demographics. Last things I'll hit on this. I think it's pretty obvious, but your super listeners account for a lot of the content. So like your super listeners might listen to 22 hours of podcasts a week. A
week?
I listen to podcasts, but there's no way I could even find 22 hours of consumable podcasts.
You say 22 hours a week or a month?
A week.
I mean, of course you can't. You don't have a full-time job if you're listening to
there we
22
go.
hours a week, man. Well, I thought I listened to a lot of podcasts, but I do not. I take that back. Oh my goodness. I got to up my game.
The average episode is about 30 minutes, which corresponds with the average American's commute. That again is like not surprising, but it's kind of I know I've talked to different people about like what's your sweet spot, and everyone has a different sweet spot in terms of length, but it seems like the average sweet spot just matches the commute, which makes sense. Any guesses as to why people listen to podcasts in terms of like, well, I'll leave it. I won't give you that.
Learning, entertainment.
Yeah, 74% say they listen to learn.
Oh, that's a lot higher than I thought it would be.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, and then average downloads of your average podcast. You have a guess?
Like number of downloads?
Number of downloads for your average podcast. Yes.
In total or per week or per month? What's the?
Per week.
I think I saw this. I think it was 27.
You're right. But that's lower than I thought. And I'm going to give my statistical rant in a second about how it shouldn't be average. But they say average podcast has 27 listens per episode. I think listens and downloads have to be equated here because I haven't seen technology that can separate those two things. But top 1% of podcasts get, they say 3,200 listeners per episode. I would have thought that would have been higher. And then someone like Joe Rogan gets about 7 million downloads per episode. And Spotify paid him what? 200 million? Am I remembering that right?
Something like that.
So like I would have thought that was way bigger. Now maybe Spotify's saying the trajectory of this market is immature and developing rapidly, and so that 7 million projects to 20 million in 3 years. Who knows? But I would have thought all those numbers would be greater than they actually are. Looks like $100 million deal. I'm just correcting. Okay. And let me find the length.
To get to your stats point too, with that 27, if that's median, given that you have the Joe Rogans in the world, the median's probably 15.
Oh, it's way less than 27. Right? I mean, divide 7 million by 27, and that's you're skewing. Yeah, you're skewing a crazy amount of this with the top end. So yes, it needs to be median, and don't worry, I will call Riverside FM's analytics department and give them a talking to.
This is Skippy the Skeptic.
Yeah, I'm here to confirm some bias I have about podcast listening trends. All right, you ready for quiz number 2?
Ooh, I am. I've been preparing.
This one's actually related to investing, which is rare for me. Hopefully we'll get to talk about pizza later. Okay, here we go. Stock A has a PE ratio of 10. Stock B has a PE ratio of 20. If you build an equally weighted portfolio of stock A and stock B, is their PE ratio less than 15, exactly 15, greater than 15?
So if I'm buying an equal amount of both,
yeah, so don't do the
then-
math. Just give me your initial.
Okay.
Because I can see you're thinking over
Yeah.
there. Just give me
Yeah.
your initial thought. Less than 15, equal to 15, or greater than 15?
greater than 15.
Ooh, greater. Okay. So this came across, I want to give credit, at 10K Diver on Twitter. And it's a really good, I think it's just a really good thing to think through. He had another caveat in there, which I thought made it more confusing. So I excluded for you, but maybe that made it. He also said their average PE ratio is 15 because he did 10 plus 20 divided by 2 equals 15. So the majority of respondents on his survey said it's exactly equal to 15. The correct answer is actually 13.33, which is less than 15. So let's do that together in our head, because I spent 60 seconds going, what's actually right here? So you have 100K of stock 1 and 100K of stock 2. You combine them equally weighted on price. This is where I think it gets interesting. When you equally weight, you equally weight on price. You don't equally weight on earnings. So you have $200,000 worth of stock. And then when you combine the earnings, the 10K and the 5K, you have $15,000 worth of earnings. And so then when you do that price divided by those earnings, the 200 divided by the 15, you get the 13.3. But I'll guarantee you that most people aren't thinking about that when they see combined, kind of how stocks combine. When you look at those, you pull up an ETF and look at the cumulative price to earnings or the cumulative price to free cash flow or whatever. So I just thought it was a fun thing to throw your way.
Yeah, that was fun. I think my brain, because you wouldn't let me do any sort of math, my brain, this is like pure bias based on my methodology, I think, is I said I didn't even do equal weighting. I was like, I'm buying more. Yeah. I was like, I'm buying more of the high PE stock. I just went there for some reason, which is not what you said. Like, you didn't ask me that, but I was like, I'm obviously going to hold more of the expensive thing.
Yeah, but no, you nailed it. So I actually, that was going to be my tag on point, is like, in today's market, the PE of 20 stock is the Facebook or the Google or whatever is expensive right now, and the cheap stock is tiny. So the market weighting is probably like 10-1. And if that's the case, if the price weighting is 10-1 with the PE of 20 stock, you can do the math, but you buy 100K of the PE 20 stock and 10K of the PE 10 stock, your combined PE ratio would be, I think it's 18.3 or something. It obviously skews towards that. One with the greater weight.
Makes sense.
And that's how it works in the S&P 500 today, and that makes perfect sense as to why you're thinking that way. Yeah,
it's a good little quiz for the listeners. That's fun. Look at you being fun.
There's a first time for everything, man.
Can I reach into the fishbowl for some, what I'll call just like investment lessons? Is that cool?
Please do. Yeah.
All right. There's an article blog that came out a couple weeks ago of Dollars and Data. That's called "Go Big Then Stop." I'd love to talk about this because I think the abstract lesson from this is so important, and it's one of those things that's obvious and we talk about it all the time. But I think that the way that they broke it down here was super powerful. So the high level lesson I'm talking about is about compounding and the importance of compounding. And so the concept of go big then stop, what Nick, who wrote this, what he's saying is that if you say that for the first 10 years of your career, you're going to save money, right? So that's starting early. Mm-hmm. And then someone else, your friend Bozo, says that they are, sorry, was that too direct? Says, I'm not going to invest for the first 10 years of my career. I want to go to the Bahamas every year or whatever. And so they wait 10 years and then start saving for the next 30 years. If you assume that they get roughly the market return, if you assume 7% on their money, after 40 years, you, the start early person, would have more money. You'd be over $1 million, whereas the person that started later would be a little less than $1 million. So there are a lot of dependencies on here, right? 7% is important. You have to be 7% or above in order for this to be true.
Mhm.
But the concept is just so fascinating. And so the go big then stop is basically saying, even if somebody just said, all I'm going to do is for the first 10 years of my career, I'm going to invest every year, and then I just don't do anything. That's the go big at the beginning, then stop. You're going to be pretty well off, right? The higher the return, the later you start, it gets worse and worse and worse, of course, because so much of your returns comes from those early years.
Yeah, so let's do sanity check. I don't mean to be a little downer. I completely agree with everything Nick, who's at of Dollars and Data on Twitter, if you don't follow him, and you just said. But there's 2 or 3 things that are really important that don't always happen in real life. The first thing that never happens in real life is consistent 7% returns, right? What might happen with your go big is you throw a ton of money at the stock market for 10 years, and then you live in Greece and the stock market loses 90% of its value. And like, you're not necessarily better off because in that case, this is a very extreme example. In that case, the people bought the stuff you bought for 90% cheaper 10 years later may end up better. That doesn't mean it's a good strategy. That doesn't mean you should plan on that, but just as a FYI. Other thing that he talks about, and I know why he did it, but I don't think this is real life. Correct me if I'm wrong here, if I'm remembering this correctly. He picks a fixed dollar amount and says you're going to invest that fixed dollar. I think it might be $1,000, right? Well, how life actually works is you enter the workforce and you make 40K or 80K or whatever it is, and then your salary grows over time. So most people invest a percent of their salary, which would mean if you start at 40K and ended at 200K, you'd be investing significantly more in the latter years, which might flip this equation on its head a little bit. That being said, point being here is just starting early is critical. And I think everyone knows that, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Any thoughts there, Doogles?
Yeah, I've lots of thoughts. One is on the consistency of the returns. I will throw in one counter example for you, which also is a different version of a go big then stop, and that's Bernie Madoff, because he went big and had very consistent returns and then stopped because he went to jail. But anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. To your last point, though, one of the charts that he has in there, which is, it's not directly like related to that, but it's tangentially related, is how much more you have to save for each year that you delay. Yeah. And so I think to that point is if you say, I'm not going to put in money for a while, you have to end up putting more and more in. And so it becomes, I think around 10 years, around 10 years, it's double. You have to put in double the amount. So if you were going to put in $10,000 for the first 10 years, but you didn't, you'd have to start putting in 20,000 to make up for it. And so I say that's tangentially related, because if you end up waiting to put in certain amounts until later in your career, you have to end up putting in a lot more. And so hopefully you've doubled your salary, during that period of time, which may or may not be the case. But yeah, I think that's a good point, right? Life is not this simple. Typically, There might be some people that say, yeah, I'm always going to put in this amount. The return's going to fluctuate. Your income's going to fluctuate. You might lose your job. You might get a windfall, right? There's all kinds of things that come into it. But the premise of just start.
Oh yeah. And when you tie it back to a windfall, this is invest that money as soon as possible in most cases, because so he has a great chart that's at the end of 40 years. Again, he assumed they put in an equal investment each of the 40 years. So if you're just thinking about it, 1/40th is 2.5%. So you'd think hey, the money they put in each year is about 2.5% of the total balance, but that's not how it works at all. The money they put in at year one is nearly 7% of the total balance, because it gained interest or capital gains or compound growth, whatever. And then it got interest on top of interest on top of interest for 40 years. Whereas the stuff you put in year 39 never had the opportunity to do that. So I really like the approach and think it's important to understand. It's just never as simple as a scenario like this.
No,
our listeners are smart enough to figure that out, though.
Exactly. That's why it's just look at the abstract concept and takeaway even more than some of the specific data. Just use the specific data to grasp the concept. But the abstract concept is just start start early. Early money will have time to compound, provided you're not in Greece, and all's well.
Yeah. Is that
Anything
it?
else
What
in your
else do we
fishbowl?
got?
The other stuff I wanna talk about later. I think I'll drop a little bit right now, but I want to do some research here. This buy now pay later. I don't know what to call it. It's
The
they're
Afterpay and the Klarna stuff, right?
yeah, and Affirm went public a few months ago. So there are these companies that have been coming out, for I guess over the course of the last decade, let's call it, which are organizations that are putting some version of, let's call it, zero interest out there. You
Yeah.
can pay in even installments with zero interest. And the way that they make money is not on the interest, obviously, because that's zero, but they make money because the companies that they partner with to sell the goods, like Peloton and Affirm is a good example. So you can buy your Peloton for a couple $1,000s, pay over 3 years, and it's zero interest. And so as a consumer, you're like, I mean, time value money, awesome.
Seems like free money, yeah.
Right. And then Peloton will give Affirm a fee for like a finder's fee, right? So you can just think about that as like a marketing cost effectively for Peloton. And so there are a number of these companies that have been coming out. And the thing that I think is interesting, but this is why I want to dive into and research some stats to make sure that the reason I think this is interesting actually makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Is what does this mean for things like credit cards and personal loans? Is the consumer debt market actually going to start to shift toward a different product? And from what I've seen early over the last year, the answer was yes. Over the last year, there's been much more from a consumer standpoint, an aversion toward credit cards and personal loans, but that's starting to flip back now. It seems like credit cards are going up. Sorry, your hands are getting out there, so I know you got something. Bring it.
I love it. Thanks for bringing this up. So yes, I should probably read the Affirm 10K and do a deep dive. Like, I think we should talk about this at future episodes. But your boy Jack Dorsey, it was so interesting when Square bought Afterpay, right? The Australian one.
Yep. That's right.
For $29 billion. What he said, because he's on this kick about making the world a better place, whether he understands what that means or not. He said two things. He said, one, younger generations, millennials on down, are kind of afraid of credit card debt in a way that their parents weren't. Like, they've seen the negative consequences of debt, and they're dealing with debt for student loans and other things. So they're much more apprehensive about credit card debt. So that ties to a point. But he also said Square is about improving. He's looking to build a holistic financial services platform that touches all aspects, that doesn't include charging people 20% interest on their debt, because he feels like that's I'm putting words in his mouth, but I think you get the point. Like, he feels like that can be predatory in a way that Afterpay is not necessarily predatory. So Afterpay works. Go for it.
This is why I'm like so excited to dive into this stuff and actually look at it, because my initial inclination here is to say, yes, this is interesting. It seems like it could be a shift in the financial market, but it also might be jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, because it's kind of like when the pandemic hit last year, my wife and I, she and I basically sat down and said, let's look at our finances. Like, I mean, we always sit down and look at our finances, but specifically, let's look at some of the things that we like, subscriptions that we may have just allowed to continue, right, over time, because we want to cut down this year, because who the heck knows what's about to happen, right? So we just wanted to go into that mode. So there are all these like what the heck is Apple charging us $4 a month 6 times for? It's like all this random stuff like we were finding, right? It's like, oh, I signed up for that. And I think that there's one world in which you can say, using a credit card, yes, they charge you whatever, 20% or so for that. But another world in which you can say, oh, it's all free. And I think we're getting closer into this world where you go, oh, it's basically free. Like, because there's no interest, it's free. Robinhood, right? It's free. And then you end up you've got your Peloton payment and this payment and that payment. And now you've stacked up all these quote unquote all this free money. And I think that's just it's a hidden cost potentially, versus everyone knows about the 20% cost and negative compounding. So that's just my initial inclination. It's interesting.
Okay. But tell me if I read this right, because I've never used like Afterpay or an Affirm. But as I understand it, they'll let me do whatever they kind of think my credit limit might be. And then if I don't pay them after some period, they almost like lock my account.
Yep.
Right? Is that okay?
Yep. That's right.
So, I mean, in what world? So, I'm incredibly old school and conservative. I think you should have the money. Like, if you want the $2,000 Peloton, I think you should have $2,000 in your account. But if you don't have that approach, it seems like Afterpay is a lot better than putting it on a credit card in almost every way, because it might cost. The cost to me is completely hidden, Doogles. I'm not claiming there's not a cost to me, but it's completely hidden. So Peloton knows that they could probably sell 20% more product or 20% more goods with some sort of financing option than they could without. That's typically how the equation breaks down.
Yep.
So it's a win for them because they're playing, I don't know, 3 to 5%, I'm guessing here, to the Affirms of the world, and they're getting 20% more sales. Like, it's a win for them. It seems like it's a win for the Affirm or Afterpay because it's a pretty simple business model that you make a decent chunk of change off, and you're not. I don't think you're taking people to small claims court. Like, I don't think the administration costs are anywhere near what it would be for Chase as it relates to credit cards. I could be wrong. So I don't. This is the wrong terminology. It sounds like it might be a win-win-win
I know.
improvement.
It certainly sounds that way. And we need to dive in and let's come back and talk about it again. To me, it's a shifting of incentives. If you take the one, like an example of one item, I would say I fully agree with you. But what are you incentivized to do when something is free? Volume goes up, right? And so if you take the individual that says, I want to get a Peloton and it's $2,000, and they responsible individual and says, I have $2,000 today, but wait, I can pay over 3 years and it's free. I'm going to do that option, right? And that is that is a responsible choice. And then you go and you get item number 2. And item number 2, you go, yeah, I have the $5,000, but I'm going to pay that over time. And then in 3 years, you now have, I don't know, $700 in monthly payments, right? That you have, and maybe you no longer have that $5,000, $2,000.
You got a car payment that you didn't even realize you were getting.
Exactly. And maybe now you've lost your job, but you have all these payments. But back then you could have bought them, and then you would have known what your balance sheet was in an easier fashion. That's the circumstance and I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I actually think that these services are great from everything that I've seen. I want to research it because the incentive changes, just like with a Robinhood, like volume will inevitably go up, and there are consequences of that. And I think that what I've read from Max Levchin on Affirm when he was starting it, and where I think Dorsey's heart actually comes from, and the reason that they're buying Afterpay, I think it's from a good place, but there are just these unintended consequences that can pop out, which I'm sure that they are thinking about. But that's what I'm curious to just read more about some of that stuff, and we'll see.
That's very well said. I think all these services come from a good place and it's an improvement, but you're still effectively creating a service to provide a financing solution that leads to buying more goods or selling more product to expedite that. You're helping Peloton sell more product. And so it's hard to just put it under the umbrella of like, this is good for humanity, because I think what's good for humanity, not good for the economy or good for the stock necessarily, is for people to have cash to buy what they want to buy, because then you don't get into a debt cycle of any kind. This debt cycle is probably a better debt cycle than a credit card debt cycle, but it's still kind of a debt cycle.
It's a debt cycle. Yeah. So let's read more and talk about it. It's interesting. And we don't I think over time, this is going to play out over time. It'll be a fascinating conversation.
That's good. I appreciate your perspective there. I'm going to read some for sure.
All right. I think it's time for people to go rate and review the podcast.
Yes. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That helps more listeners find us. And you can follow us on Twitter at Skippy Doogles and skippydoogles@gmail.com. Peace.